Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Azure Site Recovery, Recovery Backup, and Business Continuity. We are happy to have you here. A couple of housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be mailed to attendees after the webinar. Usually this email will go out within 48 hours, but if you have any needs, we will provide an email address for you to get a hold of us prior to that. Question and answer will take place at the end of the webinar, but you can feel free to place any question in the chat at any time. I will now hand it over to our presenter, Aidan. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Lindsay. Excuse me. Sorry, I might mute myself a little bit. I don't want to cough in everyone's ear. I'm just getting over a cold. But let's just start off in our conversation today around our challenges that we see in the environments today in our modern availability needs. So some of the challenges that we have today can include things like having multiple disaster recovery and backup solutions within our environment, and these may not be interconnected or integrated together, and we want to consolidate these into a single operation or a single a task to be able to handle multiple pieces within our environment. Now, our environments can be complex. We're not just running in a Windows environment nowadays. We have a mixture of Windows and Linux. We're not just running in a Hyper-V platform. We're using VMware. We're using physical systems. So it's not just a Windows or Microsoft specific world. And maybe we want to develop a hybrid kind of deployment strategy, but building a hybrid environment can be complicated, and taking our existing workloads in our on-prem data centers today and leveraging the cloud, even though we want to do that, can be a complicated process. So how do we work around that to make that operational? We know that there's other services and features in the cloud that are useful, that can enhance our business, enhance our applications and our services, but how do we get to that point? It can be a bit of a challenge to make that work for our environments today. So since our conversation today is around BCDR, some of the challenges we see specifically around disaster recovery, like we mentioned, are this multiple solution environment. We can have recovery solutions that don't actually protect all of our applications. So there could actually be a gap between all of our business critical, mission critical systems and what is actually being properly backed up and protected. And so that can be a liability and a dangerous situation to be in when an actual disaster occurs. Now, if we need to implement a secondary data center as part of our BCDR strategy, well, maintaining that is complex and can be very costly, not only for personnel, for managing the physical environment, as well as all the extra costs that isn't necessarily always factored in on cooling and electricity and so forth. If we want to test our disaster recovery playbook, our process, it can be difficult, and we could potentially affect our live production environment, and we don't want to do that. We have the risk where we could have data loss, we could have errors when we fail over to a secondary site. So how do we take these challenges and account for them in a more streamlined and more efficient process and way? It's interesting that when you look at the causes for, quote, IT disasters, we have common things on operational, like power failures, like if a UPS were to fail, some hardware failures or network and such. Those are common things we're used to. But it's interesting to see that the main cause or human error in that element is actually even more of a factor than what we deem as an actual natural disaster affecting our data centers. So like we said, power failures, hardware issues, but also human error as part of that we have to kind of account for specifically. So why are we then thinking and considering Azure to help our availability and BCDR needs? Well, within Azure itself, the disaster recovery and backup solutions are not a third-party bolt-on piece. They're actually built into the platform, the environment, the fabric as a first-level or a first-party mechanism. So it's not an add-on component or service. It utilizes the underpinnings of the entire service to give the best performance and reliability around those BCDR strategies and services. In Azure, it supports protecting environments that are not just Microsoft-based. Like we talked about, we're running not only on Hyper-V, but we're maybe running in VMware. We're not just running Windows. Maybe we're using Linux and Unix. Maybe we have some physical systems. Well, the BCDR solution in Azure supports protecting these environments as well. So it's not just a Microsoft software-specific solution. It makes it easy to start to implement this hybrid environment or this hybrid strategy because it allows us to replicate our workloads into Azure. And once we have our workloads in Azure, we can then start to leverage all these other solutions and services within the cloud to really drive our business forward. So we can think about machine learning and Cortana analytics and the IoT and all these intelligent stuff where it can be difficult to run something at such a large scale for that type of processing within our own existing data centers. But by leveraging stuff in the cloud, we're able to tap into all those other features and services to improve our operations, to enhance our services and our applications for our end customers, and give us the edge in our competition as well. So really, our business continuity plan needs to include both disaster recovery and backup. A common saying that I really like to use is backup is not disaster recovery. It's a part of it, but they're two pieces in the same puzzle. So these solutions work together. We have disaster recovery for when applications fail, if we need to fail over into Azure or even a secondary data center that we may own. And then we have the backup component that coincides with that for restoring against corruption or data loss, like someone drops a database or something gets corrupted somehow. We can bring that data back. So the Azure Recovery Services solution combines these two components together in the same service, and it makes it easier to have a more full and complete disaster recovery solution. So within this recovery services solution, we can leverage it to not only protect, but also extend our data center today. With ASR, Azure Site Recovery, ASR for short, we can use it to protect our business and mission-critical applications, and it can also be used as a migration tool. So if you were looking and thinking of taking something in your current data center on premises and you wanted to lift and shift that into Azure, into the cloud, with the Azure Site Recovery technology, you can replicate those systems into Azure and do a one-way failover to effectively lift and shift it to running in Azure. With Azure Backup, we can use the backup vault as a replacement for our need for tape storage. So if we're using any Azure IaaS virtual machines running in Azure directly itself, whether that's the lift and shift, or if we're even building net new virtual machines in Azure, we can also directly and easily back those systems up too. We'll come back to Azure Backup in a little bit to discuss that in a little bit more detail later on. So continuing with ASR, it really is a complete disaster recovery solution, because not only does it support multiple types of environments, like we've discussed, it doesn't just support Hyper-V, it doesn't just support Windows, it supports VMware, physical, Linux, it even works with other cloud providers like AWS. So you could protect and migrate your workloads that you may have running today in AWS into Azure. ASR also supports site-to-site. So maybe you already do have two physical data center locations, so site A to site B. It helps to orchestrate and to automate the replication of the data between these two sites, and also automate the failover mechanisms between site A to site B. We'll just build this out a little bit. There we go. So as an extension of your data center, the recovery services solution is an on-demand solution. It empowers us to automate our failover. We can even use that solution for testing and migration, which we'll touch on in a moment. But we see here in the slide some examples of some fairly heavy types of workloads like SAP and Oracle and SQL. And these are validated within this replication technology to be able to be protected or even migrated using this solution. So it's not just for small scale like web servers or small scale systems, but very large, heavy reliance systems, especially like databases and so forth. So ASR, we get things like automated replication. We can control our RPO and RTO on recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. So how far back do we want to be able to go back for recovery points? And recovery time, how quickly do we need to be able to restore information? We can even have it as low as 30-second replication. So if there's an outage or an issue, then we're only back by 30 seconds as far as the constant replication between our environment and Azure. One of the interesting features is this planned and unplanned failover with recovery plans. You can actually test your disaster recovery playbooks and run through that entire process so that you are confident that the solution works before any disaster actually occurs. You can create on-demand copies of your production environment for testing. And we see this used quite a lot because we think about when we have to deploy new patches within our environment or a new version of our app code. Maybe we don't have a QA test UAT type of environment to validate fully against. We can use ASR to have the replication of our exact production environment, spin up a test copy in Azure, and apply our patches, our new code, whatever we may need to test against the real copy of production. Excuse me. So that we can be confident that yes, these patches don't break our app. The new version of the app is compatible. Nothing's having any issues there before we roll it out into actual production. So a very powerful tool in that mechanism for sure. So then what's supported? Microsoft has tested many different scenarios and applications, and they continually enhance and add to this solution on a monthly, if not even a weekly basis. So we see the actual teams responsible for some of these specific Microsoft-specific workloads like SharePoint, Exchange, Dynamics. They validate this supported solution in the replication, in the failover components, and validate that it operates properly. And we see Microsoft has even done testing in other areas that maybe they aren't the ownership of. So we see SAP and Linux and Oracle. So they don't just test against the key workloads that they produce, but really what we see in the real world, what people are running against. And we can also see from this diagram here that there's some other solutions that are coming soon. They're still working on additional enhancements, like we mentioned, almost on a weekly basis to the solution. So let's take a moment then to talk about Azure Backup. Whether we are using an on-prem environment, or if we have a hybrid environment, or using IaaS virtual machines in Azure directly, Azure Backup can be used in all of these scenarios. It integrates with products like System Center Data Protection Manager, if we have that deployed, and it also has its own standalone installation called the Azure Backup Server. And as mentioned before, if we're running these virtual machines in Azure, we can directly do a VM level snapshot or backup of those systems that are running in Azure itself. With Azure Backup, it gives us a long-term retention period. Think of it as that replacement for our tape infrastructure, our tape storage. Some industries have specific requirements for data retention, like in the healthcare industry or legal or manufacturing, places like these, where they have certain legal requirements around that. Azure Backup has a retention period of up to 99 years. So if you had to keep tapes for 5, 7, even 10 years worth of backups, how many tapes would that be? How hard would it be to retrieve data from the right tape? You have to call it from off-site. You need to get the right set. You need to get the right tape and attach it into your tape infrastructure, mount that right, and find the file and so forth. With Azure Backup, it greatly simplifies this need and the approach in doing a restore much more efficiently and effectively. So, what are the costs? Well, if we compare things like software licensing, maintenance, off-site storage costs, and so forth, the cloud-based backup solution can be significantly cheaper than what you may already be paying for today. So how does it work then? Well, in the example, in this diagram, this is of an Azure virtual machine, so an IaaS virtual machine running up in Azure. An agent is installed on that platform, and it's used to take snapshots of all the disks, not just the OS, any disks attached to that virtual machine, and those are then transferred into the backup vault. You can then use the backup vault to restore those as needed. You can also use Azure Backup to backup file and folder level. So not just say at a virtual machine snapshot type of layer, but even file and folder level specifically. So you can do item level restores against file servers and really any type of system that you configure it for. So how does New Signature come into play with all of this? Well, New Signature is a full-service technology company and a premier Microsoft solution provider. The values that New Signature was founded on continue to drive our success and our commitment to delivering our great customer experiences. And that's really who we really are. That's what we focus on. We all work with technology, but our focus is ensuring that our customers have a great experience while we help and guide them with their business and technology and solution needs. From a technology perspective, we deliver a full life cycle of services across the entire Microsoft stack. I see there's a question in the chat. I'll get to that in just a quick moment. Thanks. Whether you're on-premise or in the cloud or have a hybrid deployment environment, New Signature is here to help you understand the value, realize the benefits, and mitigate any of the risks along the way. So New Signature, let me just build this deck out. There we go. So we've built a recovery experience to provide a comprehensive recovery plan which allows you to tap into our team of experts to help create, update, and execute the plan. In the event where a recovery is required, New Signature's highly skilled team of experts are available 24/7, 365 to take your call. Utilizing the best-of-breed cloud services within Azure, this is obviously built on top of the site recovery technology, you can rest assured that your application, your mission-critical systems will be available in case your data center does have some type of actual disaster. So just briefly, New Signature has 3 pillars of offerings. We have our professional services, managed services, and cloud applications. So just briefly, our professional services consist of our consulting capabilities, which are divided into 2 practice areas, performance or platform and productivity, and custom design and development. Our managed services includes our advisory and operational services that we provide on a recurring basis to our customers. And that's where our recovery services experience fits into that as well. Then we have our cloud applications that are packaged like SaaS offerings or software as a solution, as a service rather, that have been developed on top of our cloud platform and productivity technologies. So I see there's a couple questions in the chat, so I'll take a minute to read those if Lindsay wanted to wrap up a little bit while I look at those questions, and then I'll answer those in a minute.
Absolutely. Just to remind everyone, we will be sending out this recording. You will automatically get that in a couple of days. We send within 48 hours. And if you have any questions at any time that you didn't have a chance to ask here, the email is listed here. It is info@newsignature.com. We are happy to get your question to the right person. Aiden will respond, or anything to that effect. If you need anything at all, we're happy to help, but I will let Aiden get back to those questions.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I see the first question from Keith, and I'll just read it out for any that might be on the phone and not able to visualize or see that right now. So the first question is, can you do item level restores from different time periods? For example, a file changed today, but we need to restore the version from 1 month ago. So the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. So when you're using Azure Backup as a service, whether you're using it through DPM, Azure Backup Server, or the Azure Backup Service directly in Azure, when you deploy the agent to your endpoints that you want to protect, you can do file folder level backups, and the retention is up to 99 years. So based on your configured schedule for backups, either daily or so forth, then yes, effectively you can initiate a restore process, choose the appropriate restore point in time, so a month ago or 6 months ago, 99 years ago if that's needed, and be able to locate that file and do a restore specifically. And when you do the restore activity, you can choose whether to overwrite the existing one, or you can make a copy or store it in a different per your restore processes. So a follow-up question around that is, I would assume longer retention periods increase cost. Right. So by default or by native configuration, Azure Backup will store your data up to 99 years. The increase in cost is around volume of data, right? So if you were to take a daily backup of a file server, let's say, you do a full backup maybe the first of the week, do incremental all the way through, and then do a full backup for weekly and then monthly and so forth, then obviously that data compounds, right, as far as copying that data into the vault. So the cost grows based on the volume of storage. So depending on what tier, like up to 500 gig or over X number of terabytes, then the cost is how much in the volume of that data specifically. But there's some pricing tools that Microsoft has available. Feel free to send us a quick email. We can get you that information, Keith, on the costing around that to project that out for you. The second question is about ASR. So it asks, if a failover occurs for an application, how do users access that application? For instance, is there an RDP front end where employees can use remote desktop to execute the application? So good question. So it depends on how you do your configuration in your environment. A couple scenarios would be, if you have a hybrid environment between your on-prem data center and Azure, then you have a site-to-site VPN connectivity or an express route connection, which views or shows as Azure as an actual extension of your data center. So if you were to fail your application over, then maybe you need to have a DNS change because the IP address would change from one site to the other, but then it would still be accessible to your end users. As far as like front-end RDP, when you do a failover, when you build a virtual machine in Azure, you can include the creation of RDP connections or PowerShell Direct connections that you want to allow access internal or inside to the application. So it's based on a little bit on your hybrid configuration, if you're in a hybrid scenario, or if you're just doing a full failover to Azure and not having connectivity back to your on-prem data center. But yeah, you can definitely control ports and accessibility. And you can control if it's a front end, does it need access out to the internet, so it's a public facing, and then the internal pieces like SQL servers or your app logic layers, those don't get internet access, those are restricted inside. So I see there's some people still typing, so I'll wait a few minutes there to see if there's any other follow-up questions. Yep. So Keith is just mentioning that, with a 2 or 3 tier application, there's maybe some latency that sometimes happens if you can't do a direct, and you can't do a direct application launch, so you need RDP to reduce latency. Yeah, if that's a need for your application or the way it communicates and works, then you can definitely set up an endpoint on the system or systems required so that you can do RDP into the failed over systems. The other question is, can you have RDP server to the app front end, to the database server in Azure, and all users go to the RDP server? So kind of like a jump box or front end component from the sounds of it. If you're three-tier, yeah. So you're referring to Keith there, and I don't know if they're able to come off mute or not, Lindsay, but are you referring to where the end users connect to the RDP box, and then from there they connect to the front end, like into the app box, or just as a surface?
Oop. Hello, everyone. If you can still hear Aiden, you were muted for a second, but now everyone should be able
I'm sorry. Sorry, Lindsay. That's why I'm talking to myself here. My apologies. Yep. So yes, RDP first to reduce latency. So yeah, you could have an RDP box there in Azure or as part of the failover recovery plan mechanism, and then have that be able to communicate to the app front end, to the database tier, and kind of have that built out. Yep. There's also a question about what kind of security is on the backups. So when you configure backups, you actually have to set it up with a passphrase, which is part of the encryption. So the data is encrypted while it's being in transit. It's encrypted at rest in the backup vault, and each endpoint that you install the Azure Backup service onto, if you're going to go directly into Azure, then you can have a separate passphrase or effectively encryption key to each endpoint, so you can control, who can restore what data as long as they have the right passphrase for each of those. So with that, we'll kind of wrap things up. If there's any other questions or you want further details, please do feel free to reach out to us at info@newsignature.com. We can make sure that information and those questions are passed along to myself, and we can get you additional information as needed.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.